So welcome to the Digital Economist from the World Economic Forum here in Davos, Switzerland. We are holding our inaugural roundtable, and we're very excited to have a huge turnover and a highly curated roundtable. The Digital Economist is an impact platform focused on thought leadership and bringing investable opportunities in alignment with the Sustainable Development Goals to the fore. So we're very excited to welcome folks on January 23rd this evening, and looking forward to great partnership and a lot of value we create for the community along the way. So welcome.
Welcome, everyone. Welcome back to another talk in the series of the talks we've been having for the past couple of weeks now. The Digital Economist, this event is being hosted, and eventually it'll also be live. It'll be streamed on YouTube as well. This event is being hosted by the Digital Economist. We're an organization that generates actionable insights and build products and services for a human-centered digital economy. The Digital Economist has launched this speaker series to drive radical collaboration between global action leaders on the most urgent topics and challenges we face today. And those are climate, health, society, economics. I want to have the pleasure of introducing Andrew Andrea. Andy has been, more than for 25 years, building multi-sector partnerships for emergency humanitarian relief, actionable sustainable development, preventing armed conflict, and addressing global risks. He's director and founder of Alliance for Impact, Impact 17, and chair of Board of Sustainable Impact Association, all dedicated to promoting, building, and supporting partnership for social good. And he's a certified professional facilitator and alumni of Partnerships Brokers Association and a proud board member of Martin Ennals Foundation. Welcome, Andy.
Thank you very much. And how are you?
That's great. Andy, so let's start with, we've talked before, but you have had a very, diverse career. You have, worked with the UN, and you worked with the World Economic Forum, very high impact organizations. And now, you're also working to build the Impact 17, where, your focus is on actionable, and, the key point is actionable action items for global good. So if you want to talk about your journey and how it shaped the way, you think about the world and the way you think about how social good can be done.
Yeah, sure. Thanks for the opportunity to talk about myself. It's it's probably the only subject I know well. My career has actually followed a path of convenience, really. You have been doing work that I've loved, and when I've moved on to do another job, I've tried to leave behind the bits I haven't enjoyed and take on more of the stuff that I have enjoyed. And the common thread throughout it all has been working with people and organizations that are experts in their field, and helping combine their power for some social good impact. And we started off in a lobbying company, actually, in London, where we found that actually getting our clients together to call for a change in government policy had much more impact than individual companies trying to do it themselves. And it took that. I was lucky enough to be able to work for a development charity and then the UN, doing that around emergency humanitarian relief. then probably one of the most exciting parts of my career was working for an armed conflict mediation organization. I wasn't the mediator, I was the director of communications there. I mean, I did that for 12 years, but what we learned there was the real value on the ground of being direct, the practical impact of the work that you're doing. And then, moving on from that after 12 years to go and work at the World Economic Forum was a fantastic privilege. To work at with global leaders. I was responsible for the blue chip events in Davos, where you brought together heads of state and the CEOs of the world's largest companies. And these sessions were called the IGWELs, very unique sessions. But what I found there was there's an element of frustration, if I'm to be honest with you, that we had such a fantastic opportunity to corral these global leaders around something to have practical impact rather than just the strategic conversations. And then moving back into the UN, where my role was to build the engagement of the private sector in coordinated action on the ground for humanitarian purposes, was again, it was a fantastic privilege to be in charge of the team that was coordinating this. But again, there's that element of frustration where there was a lot of talking about partnerships and partnership building and how valuable and important that is. And SDG, Sustainable Development Goal number 17, is all about partnerships. And there was a lot of promoting of that principle, of that goal to achieve all the other goals, but very little conversion into action and to impact, as you were saying. So I thought, well, why not? I'll do it. So I decided to set up an entity, ended up being 3 organizations rather than 1, to promote, to create, and to support partnering for social good. So that's where my drive comes from. I have to say, Avinda, before we go any further, I have to say that I would not be able to do my work if I hadn't have done what I've done before in these amazing organizations, the UN, the World Economic Forum, the Center for Humanitarian Dialogue, which was the armed conflict mediation organization, and all the others. So it's a real privilege to have that lifelong experience.
Absolutely. I think, I think the experience of, working with the organizations also sometimes exposes you to what is working, what is not working, right? And so I think my follow-up question is, is going to be, you worked in armed conflict resolution where you see, the 2 different, partners or 2 different, parties who see the world in a completely different way sometimes. Mm-hmm. And then trying to build up, goals that are common for resolution. And I would say, similarly, if you start to think about, on one side is the idea of sustainable development, on the other side is the idea of private profitability. And they sometimes, come head to head, right? And the way of looking at the world might be completely different. How do you go about, resolving or finding common grounds where there are win-win situations? Or not, just because there is a lot of there are times when there's a difference in the power dynamic. And I'm asking this question because, our audience is very diverse. We have EITs joining here from all across the globe. And this is very much, an issue in Africa and South Asia, where the partners sometimes, sitting on the table are sort of unequal entities. And how do you still achieve those common good where there's win-win situation?
Yeah, let's start by saying that we've all had experience of partnerships and at the individual level. And we recognize that even at the individual level, where it's as simple as it could possibly get, the partnership is still a complex system. Trying to, with the other person that you're partnering with, is difficult enough as it is. I mean, we try to make that effort, all of us, I'm sure, on that human-centered approach as well in the work that we do, because you don't just partner with a faceless entity, that it is an artificial construct, a company or the most simplest aspect of it. And then we talk about multi-sector partnerships, where your drive, your motivations, your understanding of the world is through a totally different lens. I'll give you an example of that. If you have a non-profit organization partnering with a company, and they're talking about, the people that represent them are talking about sustainability. The simple definition of that word, sustainability, is going to be different from both parties. They're both going to be talking about different things. Their motivations for partnering are going to be different. One, the non-profit organization is what we might call mission-driven. So it might be to prevent poverty or to improve education. And the company's motivation might be, we might assume it to be making profit. The world is changing. That's not always the case. So just to say that in order to build that trust and answer your question, you need to spend time together to understand each other. And there are some tips and tricks that, can help us do that. And one is that you start with a general idea about why you're partnering. What is it you're trying to achieve? But then you work with the partner to articulate what that objective is in more detail. And simply by co-creating the definition of the objective, you're beginning to understand each other. But you need to go steps further than that, of course. You need to include elements of trust and an understanding of the value of diversity. And in this context, I mean, what is it that each of the partners can bring? Because they're different. Why would you partner with somebody who has exactly the same to offer that you do? No, what you do is you look for somebody or an organization that has something additional to add value. So you have to appreciate what it is that they bring together and be transparent about that. And then break it down even further. You may have a joint objective that you both understand, but you now need to share some understanding of what you're each individually trying to achieve. Either the organizations themselves, so it could be, we want to do this work because we're trying to attract more socially driven staff members to apply for work for our company, for example. Or it might be for the NGO, we want to work with you as a company because you have a greater understanding of the environment in your country where you are working. And that way together we can help achieve the common goal. So you need to understand the objectives of the organizations separately. And then also, if it's possible, the motivations of the individuals that are representing those organizations. I'm representing this nonprofit organization because my boss has told me to do it. I don't want to do it, but I have to do it. It's part of my job. That helps me from the company side to understand how to work with you better. From the company side, it might be, look, my company's given me 5 hours a week to spend on whatever I want, and this is something that I'm really passionate about. And that's why I want to work with you on this project. So by sharing this kind of information, you can break down the barriers, you can increase levels of understanding. And of course, there's this, in those kinds of conversations, it's useful to distinguish between positions and interests. The stated position is, and this came out in the armed conflict mediation work quite clearly, we want independence from that government, from that state. That's your position. But your interest might be that, well, the people in this area of the country need more and free access to food. So trying to understand those kinds of examples really helps break down lots of barriers to partnering and for taking positive action forward. is my
Excellent.
opinion.
Excellent. No, I think those are very good insights. You also had, when we were talking earlier, your take on thought leadership. We see these days, a lot of the effort is being done to establish themselves. People try to establish themselves as thought leaders, and you have an interesting take on thought leadership and how it's evolving in this world. And we also talked about how we also see this world as we have a lot of idea of influencers, right? Influencing the ideas and how society is being shaped. So if you want to talk about how you look at that, I think that'll be really interesting.
Yeah. Okay. I'll start with, we're always told that a story speaks 1,000 words like a picture, but if I tell it to you as a story. So there was one day I was, I'd organized a number of sessions that brought the private sector together with humanitarian organizations. And on this particular day, there was a session where there was a panel of 8 people. Mistake number 1. There was a panel of 8 people talking about data security for refugees. In order to service refugees properly, it's useful to collect data about them and so on. In the audience were about 130 people who were data experts. And what happened was that the 8 people on the stage, the 8 experts on data security, were talking to a room full of data experts about what they already knew. It was a perfect opportunity for these people to get together and make change happen. But instead, they were talking like influencers, and they were passionate thought leaders, but there were 138 thought leaders in that room, so it was totally pointless in my view, and it was a missed opportunity. And I think that happens too often, and I'm in danger of doing it today actually, which is being a thought leader around partnering. We talk so much about how important it is to partner, why we should partner. But you know what? Let's get on and just partner. Let's do it. Let's take that step. And we're at a stage now where I actually have a partner at the moment called the Planetary Emergency Partnership, and we're organizing a conference together in December. It's called the Step into a Better World conference. The Planetary Emergency Partnership, it's a fantastic name, the Planetary Emergency. There is a planetary emergency. We have to take action now to stop the world collapsing. There's some good news coming out of the United States today, which hopefully will result in some policy changes that will be good for efforts towards climate change, for example. But we need more of it. We need to actually take the action around climate change, around the economies, around humanitarian action and poverty and so on. That needs to happen. We need to get on with it before it's too late. And the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, and the ESGs, environment, social, and governance frameworks, provide that opportunity for us to move forwards. And you talked earlier on, I clicked with this. You talked about actionable approaches. And that's why our organization is called Impact 17. We are concerned that thought leadership, even commitments and actions are not enough anymore. What we need to see is the actual impact. It's like my father used to say, stop telling me you're a good boy, just prove it to me. And that's what we need now, is we need proof. Show me the impact that you're having, or else try something different.
I think that's excellent. And the Digital Economist is proud to be one of the partners in STEP conference, where we're leading the tech segment of the conference, and there'll be more conversations around that happening. I think what you're doing here is yes, being a thought leader, but very actionable thought leader, because I think many people on our panel are from across the globe. So you're basically seeding the ideas of creating actionable. And impact. And I think the ideas you're discussing are pretty inspiring, and it gives a new perspective for us who want to actually make some change. I think I want to, before I take other questions from the participants, and we have a series of questions, I want to ask a last question before we go there. If you want to touch on the diversity, one of the things that I often think about is the beauty of we being this global citizens is that there are a lot of good efforts that are typically done from small ethnic communities. And you can talk about white helmets, you can talk about Khalsa Aid, and sometimes they're too far away from, there are no bridges, they're very actionable, on the ground doing work, versus there are large organizations which have which are far more process oriented. How do you build these bridges between these small ethnic diverse social good organizations who might have more ear to the ground in making changes, and this large organization which are far more connected, far more driven by policy? And how do you build a connection between the two?
All right. Well, obviously, I'm going to be talking about this in a generic terms because, as we were saying at the very beginning, this is all has to be it's people driven, it's human centered, and it's specific to every context. But having said that, the diaspora are a very good example of the need for carefully considered approaches to partnerships, because there's this, whatever action we take, it's going to affect people, and it affects what we tend to call stakeholders. Mm-hmm. They're stakeholders because they have a stake in their future, in their own future. And if they can be included in a partnership, that partnership, I can guarantee you, is going to be more effective. Again, I'm talking generally. The reason it's going to be more effective with these kinds of what you called on the ground, smaller entities, is because these people, these organizations, they know the environment better than any external international organization. They know the culture. They have more of an interest in a successful outcome as well. And they have lots of expertise. So they've probably got resources, their time and energy that they want to dedicate to this because it's their own future as well. And we have to be careful that this international support doesn't become, maybe it's too late, but doesn't become any more of a neo-colonialist approach to saving the world. Why should I, Andy Andrea, living in Switzerland, be sent to a poor country with the high salary that I have, the expensive travel costs, to go and tell people in that country how to live their lives? Now, I can contribute, I can tell them how I've done things, I can share my experience and support them, but to go in and take on their job that they should be doing in their place is just not appropriate. So wherever possible, this word localization that's been adopted by the UN, and I'm not being cynical about it, I'm saying it's right that it has been adopted, should be enforced and should be encouraged. And local people and those small entities you're talking about that you mentioned should be, how can I say this without sounding paternalistic, empowered to be able to control their own futures.
Yeah, I think I completely agree with you. I think the savior complex, I think anybody who wants to do social good is typically driven by, there is a certain element of wanting to actually do social good. But I think without, the entrepreneurial approach of, what you call doing a usability analysis of what are actually the needs on the ground, I think leads to more harm than good. And we can, there are history is filled up with examples of it. Even in Canada, we have a pretty tragic history of residential schools and things like those. I'm pretty sure many of the people who started those wanted reforming was the idea of their doing social good, but what were the needs of ethnic people on the ground? I think a more entrepreneurial approach, where you're doing a lot of customer, if you want to call them that, analysis prior to even initiating things, it can help. It can go a long way.
Yeah, absolutely. And we talked yesterday about an example where it's like product development,
right?
Do you develop a product and then try and push it on an audience, or do you ask your clients what is it they need and help them to get it?
Absolutely.
And I think that for me, in the environment we're talking about in the social good space, it's that second option that's preferable.
Thank you. I think we can take a few questions from our audience. Please feel free to ask questions in the chat as well if you have more questions. So the first question comes from Ranjani Shridharan, who's one of our entrepreneurs in training. She asks, with some of the largest refugee populations in the history of the world, what are some of the ways in which we can fulfill economic potential of these populations?
Okay, so it's the economic potential of refugees. So there's a lot of work going on that, but it's a highly politically sensitive issue, because I'm trying to think how I can tell this story without giving away names. I was in a meeting with the foreign minister of a certain country that was receiving hundreds of thousands of refugees. And at the point that we spoke to them, it had tipped over 1 million refugees into their country. And 1 million refugees in that country was a tremendous drain on their resources and was beginning to cause political insecurity. And in that meeting, he said, look, we have supported these refugees as much as we can. But if the UN doesn't do anything before a certain date, we will have to send them home because they don't want them in their countries. They cannot cope with the vast influxes of refugees on occasions. So, nor do they want to put in place permanent structures, be they economic or physical structures or societal structures, that keep the refugees there. They always see this as a temporary solution. They want to see it as a temporary solution. How can, in terms of answering the question, how can you develop the economic capacity of these people? You involve the stakeholders, just as we were saying earlier on. An outside solution is never going to work. You need to work with the host country, and that can be the local or the national government of that host country and the people arriving in that country, to see what's best for them. And there you have the makings of a partnership. I'm not an economic expert. I've seen different ways of doing it. Some have been more successful than others, but so I'm not going to comment on that. I can only comment on it from the perspective of building partnerships with the actual stakeholders.
Our next question comes from Abidun Akambi. He asks, I understand you have more than 25 years of experience in development field and sustainable development practitioner. I'm inquisitive to know your views about consistently providing aids for developing countries for many years and still remain developing.
Yeah, well, again, we're straying from the issue of partnering, but you're right. I mean, I can comment quite confidently on this. There have been different ways of helping people across borders, and you can see that across the world, people are becoming better off than they were 25 years ago. But there are still major problems. The disparities are increasing. When there is a crisis, the impact of that humanitarian crisis is larger, it's more protracted. I mean, it lasts longer, it's more expensive. So there are really issues that need to be resolved still. And I think it's unfortunate that we are still living in a world where this is necessary. International organizations and international aid, to me, is a reflection of a society that's unable to look after itself. The investment, in my personal opinion, should be in that society to be able to look after itself, so that that international assistance is no longer needed. I was lucky enough when I was at the UN to be able to have the opportunity to create a project, to launch a project that's now called the Connecting Business Initiative. And what we did there was we pulled together local networks of businesses and tried to help them to look after their own environment, their ecosystem locally, so that they didn't need to call for international assistance. Because when that international assistance comes, it can have a devastating effect on the local economy, because it brings in, for example, food from warehouses outside those countries, and it brings in lots of international staff, and local economies can be seriously affected. But if the local stakeholders, and in this case, the businesses, could put in place preparedness factors and be able to respond to crises on the ground when they happen, it's that international assistance is less likely and less of it is needed. And also, the response is more effective because it's done by people who, as we talked about earlier, people who have a stake in the future and rebuilding and building back better. Yeah, there was a fantastic example. I have to tell this example in Nepal during the earthquake in Nepal a few years ago, where a trekking company, when they heard about the earthquake, what they did was they sent the Sherpas up into the mountains, into the Himalayas, to find the local villages that had been cut off. And they led them through the mountains back down towards Kathmandu, where they gave them tents. They used their tents to accommodate these internally displaced people. And then they went around Kathmandu to try and collect food to help provide that food. Where they couldn't bring the refugees down, they sent more of their Sherpas up into the mountains to take them tents and food. And when they were asked why they did this, which I thought was, to me, was an obvious reason, they said, because these are our friends and families. These are the people that keep our business alive. Without these people, we're nothing. What's the point in having a business? So it was quite a powerful story for me, anyway.
Yeah. I think there's also, I think the idea of respect of, when you're going into communities, of going with the idea that there is hundreds and maybe thousands of years of, learning that exist in the societies that we go into. And there might be insights within those societies that, on a global level, from the frameworks that we have developed, there might not, exist. I'll give you a very example, which is, pretty close to, the experience I have had. So when this pandemic started, in the beginning of the pandemic, there was, a time when, the community, Sikh community that I belong to, Sikh community has a tradition of langar, which is, community kitchen, and they have had hundreds of years of, consistently running community kitchens. So when the pandemic started, and they were, all across different parts of the world, there was a shortage of, food started to happen, even in Australian fires. I mean, without any sort of a centralized command, those community kitchens got activated. And the idea of those community kitchens is that, it's open for everyone without any, partiality of faith. And so I think there is this there is a certain knowledge that exists in societies, small ethnic societies we go to, and there are opportunities to kind of maybe learn, maybe partner, maybe to observe and even replicate for other organizations. So that's very interesting that you mentioned kind of similar in Nepal.
Yeah, and then another example, just to feed off what you just said, is we took a few of these connecting business initiative networks from their countries to a conference in New Orleans, so that they could learn from how this kind of thing is done in the West. And in the United States at the time, there were these business emergency centers set up in each state in order to prepare for and respond to emergencies. They didn't. The organizations that we took from these developing countries didn't learn so much from them as the other way around. They brought with them so much experience because they're constantly fighting the crises that they're seeing. It was the American businesses and the American audience that were trying to find out as much as they could from that experience and learn from them.
I would actually even mention an experience where I had the opportunity to learn from the American way of doing things. So this was when Hurricane Katrina, hit the Mississippi coast. So I had an opportunity to be at the coast and in a town called Waveland. And Waveland, all of the town had completely been washed away, hundreds of people dead. And there was this small publisher by the name of, I still remember the name, it was called the Seacoast Echo. And, they had lost some stuff. The publisher's house was filled with water, but they stayed put. And, I asked them, so we went there, we worked with them. We lived in a trailer for a few days. And I asked them, I said, when everybody was leaving, why did you guys stay put? And he said, the water had filled up to their attic, before it started to recede. And he said, when the whole communication is gone, people need an avenue to talk and to share stories. And he said the newspaper, acted as their channel to share their sorrow and empathize with each other. And I think that was very powerful. I mean, in growing up in India, and having seen, floods and crises, I wouldn't have, envisioned something like that. But thinking about communication as the first way where you can empathize and you can, build partnerships was amazing learning experience, from the American experience here. So definitely, I think every society has a lot to share and give, to each other if we come across as, in that learning mindset. Okay. Sorry, I think this is your talk. I just went into sharing my story, but I thought it was relevant. So the next question I want to ask is, this comes from Maria, who's from Poland. She says, you've started your career as a publisher. Is there something you still find very applicable to your work from that experience?
As a publisher? Well, yeah. I once had a job as an assistant, what do you call it? Assistant editor, production editor. Yes, I tell you what's consistent was that job was in 1992, 93, and it was for a development charity, and we had offices in 21 different countries. And what we'd found useful was collecting stories and putting them into our magazine that we would launch to the people that supported the charity. Now, in 1992, we didn't have the internet. Well, eventually we did, but on the day that I started work, we didn't. So we introduced email as a way of building a bureau of correspondence. And that was probably the first partnership that I was responsible for creating within an organization called ActionAid. And what we did, the way we approached it was because I was fresh, really, I had a very young career, didn't really know what I was doing. So the way that we approached it was by having a partnership of consensus. So this partnership was owned by individuals that were part of this bureau of correspondence. and they decided together what articles to collect, what to publish, and so on. And my job was just to facilitate the conversations. And I think it was from that I learned the power of consensus building, of equality and diversity. So I guess I hadn't thought about it like that, but yeah, that would have been that's what I learned, Maria.
That's great. Our next question comes from Varun Singhi. He asks, based on your rich experience in sustainability and impact field, do you think that UN SDGs are realistic enough to be met before the deadlines? Even the world's richest countries are not achieved those yet. So do you think they're unrealistic goals in itself, risk the damaging the credibility of the whole concept of the SDGs?
Varun, I agree with most of what you said there, or the sentiment behind it anyway. And I will use, I'll use SDG 17 on partnerships as an example. I think the fact that there is an SDG on partnerships is really important, because they're saying we need to partner in order to achieve all the other goals. Yes, of course, I'd like that. Climate action, they're saying, yes, there needs to be something done on climate action. Now, behind each of these goals, there are targets and indicators. And for me, that's where I have the problem. But it's up to me to do something about it. I'm not going to sit there and complain that the SDG framework is not perfect, therefore we should just ignore it and do something else. What my job is to do is, or my passion is to say, the SDG 17 indicators and goals are not good enough. So I'm going to do something about it. I'm going to help people to partner better. I'm going to promote partnerships more. I'm going to develop indicators that show the impact, the successful impact of partnerships. And this is a fantastic segue for me, if I can take the opportunity. My call to action on this call is we are mapping globally partnerships for the Sustainable Development Goals to identify where the niches are, what the opportunities are, who the champions are, what the issues they're facing are in terms of partnering, so that we can take steps to improve that. Now, we have a model that is starting off by collecting that data manually, and that's not enough. We need to find a technology solution to do that. And we don't have, or I don't have, the brains or the power, the capacity to do that. We do have a CTO within our organization that is doing this, but we're looking for support. We're looking for partners to help us use machine learning or artificial intelligence to take the next step so that we can effectively map globally partnerships for the Sustainable Development Goals. So that's the reason that I agreed to promote partnering and talk about partnerships through the Digital Economist today, is because we are looking for more partners to help us do that.
Definitely. Our next question comes from Joel. Joel Christoph. He asks, how has your collaboration with humanitarian organization on emergency preparedness and response changed the way you think?
Wow. I don't know. If I'm honest about that answer, I think it's kind of it's kind of evolved without me noticing. You know, when you look in the mirror every day, you don't notice yourself aging. But if you look at a photograph of yourself from 20 years ago and then you look at yourself today, you can see the difference. So the honest truth is, I've probably been brainwashed in certain ways. I think that the main way is that something I mentioned earlier is the frustration around acting, is that we don't have time to wait. We don't have time, for somebody like me, to write a book about why we should be doing something different. It's time to actually take that action, because every day that we delay means that somebody else's life and livelihoods is affected negatively. So I think there's that. That's how it's affected me, is that my patience is shortened. Now, we used to talk about boots and suits, in meaning that everybody has a role to play, and that you have the suits that are kind of more at the policy level, and you have the boots where they're more active on the ground. Both are needed. But if I think about how I've been affected, I think I've been pushed more and more to wearing the boots.
Yeah, I think it's far more fulfilling as well, because you're able to see the impact of what you're doing and your role in it. Obviously the policy has its role in it as well. So our last question, and before I then want to give some time, we want to talk a little bit more about the STEP conference that's coming up and more about the Impact 17 goals. But this last question comes from Rong Feng, who's our EIT. You have developed an intelligent network system for the World Health Organization. Could you share, how and why you worked on that project, and what was your learning from it?
Okay, so that was on the back of doing something similar for a different part of the UN. So the first example of that was this project called, I won't tell you what it's called yet, I'll tell you what it did. The objective was to create an information management tool for coordinating humanitarian response in a disaster. Yeah, so coordinating information management for the humanitarian response. And nothing existed before 1994, 95, nothing existed like that. So we started with a computer in an organization where you had to go and get permission with a certificate. It was the only computer in the organization connected to the internet. And we had to get 3 signatures to be able to use this computer on a daily basis. Okay. From that, we built a system that's now called ReliefWeb. ReliefWeb has over 1 million visits a day now. And I was lucky enough to be part of the team that designed the concept and launched ReliefWeb. And you can go and check it now. And it's changed very much, and probably for the better since we launched it. And then I was invited into WHO to build something similar, specifically on health. It didn't have the same amount of success. And the reasons for that were the politics and the bureaucracy and the administration at the time. When we built ReliefWeb, we had a team that dealt with all the political issues and the bureaucratic issues at the high level. And we had a team that they gave the space to create the technology and the tools and to build the partnerships for. But within the World Health Organization at the time, that freedom wasn't really possible. And for good reasons in some cases. The World Health Organization is more of it's not an operational organization in the same way, it's more normative. And that means that its credibility is extremely valuable and very carefully guarded. So they have very strict policies about who they can collaborate with because of the long-term effects it might have on the global policies that they come out with. An example of that is with pharmaceutical companies. Of course, the World Health Organization must work with pharmaceutical companies. How can it not? But it has to be very, very careful that there can be no criticism that its policies are affected by or pushed by the pharmaceutical companies' self-interest. So with these issues running around, we didn't have the same level of success. However, we were able to build some good partnerships, but the actual tool we were developing didn't succeed.
Sorry. Yeah. So thank you for sharing that. And so I think in the end, I want to talk a little bit about the upcoming STEP conference and also about the Impact 17 and its goals and anything you want to share with our audience.
Okay, great. Yeah, thanks for the opportunity to talk about this. So, Impact 17, it's about delivering impact through partnerships, SDG 17, hence the name. And what it does three things. It promotes, creates, and supports partnerships for a better world, for social good. How does it do that? Well, it varies, but I'll give you an example of how it supports partnerships. Facilitate partnerships, so we act as an umbrella for partnerships, and some of those we've delivered to Davos, involving UN agencies and international organizations, to create collaboration with the private sector there. We provide coaching, training, and support to individuals and individual organizations involved in partnering. We help them with their partnering strategies and so on and so forth. So one of the ways that we promote and create partnerships is through the events that we host. And we try to make those as output oriented as possible. Again, there are lots of people doing thought leadership, so we try and focus on the more practical plane. And one of those is the conference coming up in December. It's called Step into a Better World, a Call to Action. And STEP conveniently obviously reflects some action that you're taking, but it also conveniently is an acronym for the four themes of the conference. And those are sustainable society, technology and innovation, which is where the Digital Economist is one of the action architects creating their own sessions. Environment and nature is the third theme, and partnering for a better world is the fourth theme. And the cross-cutting issue that we're pushing here as well is resourcing sustainable action. So it's a lot to do. Now, Impact 17 is not an expert on any one of those themes, well, apart from partnering. So we're collaborating with organizations like the Digital Economist, like the International Council for Voluntary Agencies, and many others. I think we're up to about 30 organizations now. And those are the ones that are delivering the sessions, because those organizations are the experts. And this is this in itself, this conference is a partnership of 30 organizations, all pushing in the same direction for the same purpose. And each of them has their expertise to contribute. And they also have their own networks to contribute. And we approach that from the perspective of 1 + 1 = 3 when you're in a partnership. So it's open to anybody. There is a 95% discount on the tickets thanks to the sponsorship of Salesforce. So that 95% discount is for non-profit organizations, people working for non-profit organizations. So highly recommend. It's going to be amazing. It's going to be fantastic. I'm getting no sleep because I'm so excited about this event, and the potential of it is extraordinary. We've heard about some of the speakers we're going to be having. They will start to be announced from the 15th of November. The partners are already being announced on a daily basis. Please look it up online, and you're more than welcome to come and to get involved. There are also networking opportunities on the conference platform that we're really excited about. So connecting people for the purpose of partnering is also a major part of this conference. And I can't think of anything I'd rather be doing. I'm glad to have you along with us.
Yeah, we're really excited about the conference, and glad to be partnering with the Impact 17 on this one. So good to have you, on our talk, Andy. This was a lot of learning, a lot of new insights, and the way you think about the various issues we mentioned. I do want to, in the end, want to mention that the Digital Economist also does a lot of work, in developing actionable insights. We have our Center of Excellence, and there, we put out Center of Excellence puts out papers that you can go on our website and have a look at them. We conduct this. This is part of an ongoing speaker series where we try to bring impact leaders from across the globe and share their thoughts and insights with our audience. You can also go on to our social media and follow us there, and to keep up to date on different things that we're involved in. And if you want to get involved with the Digital Economist, or even want us to initiate a connection, for you with Impact 17, please feel free to reach out to us by sending us an email at info@thedigitaleconomist.com. And also, if you want to hear from, if you have, a speaker in mind, if you're free to nominate, speakers for our ongoing speaker series as well. Thank you again so much, Andy, for taking the time to come and talk to us. And we hope this is not the last. This is first of probably many conversations we'll continue to have with you in the future.
Thank you very much for the opportunity, Arvinder, and thank you for all the really good questions. So I'll go back and think of new answers to them as well. So thanks very much. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you so much, Andy.